Hello and welcome back to Like Maria. Today we're going to have a look at Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot. I'm going to give a brief overview and summary and just concentrate on one or two of the main issues. So by the end of today you'll have quite a good grasp of Waiting for Godot, just like Maria. So Samuel Beckett wrote this play in the middle of the 20th century. It was part of what we now call theatre of the absurd, and this meant that it had some features that take it away really from what we had experienced up until that point in theatre, the well-made play. It was unconventional in terms of plot, narrative and dialogue. And all the things really that you go to the theatre for, to be entertained, to engage with characters, etc., were quite challenging in Beckett's play. Theatre of the absurd was a term coined by Martin Esslin when he looked back and explored the theatre of this time period. And this concept of the absurd really goes back to Sartre, and it's really about characters and people in real life trying to find meaningfulness and meaning in what can be a frustrating, meaningless world, and trying to find answers. So Samuel Beckett's play works in and around that kind of philosophical search for questions and answers and a purpose in life, and the idea of creating one's own purpose in life. So this play is famously two acts which are pretty similar. It follows the fates of two characters, Estragon and Vladimir, who are traditionally played as tramps. Beckett calls it a tragicomedy, and there are indeed both elements of tragedy and comedy in terms of literary genre within this play. Estragon and Vladimir are waiting quite simply for a character called Godot to arrive. And they wait by road one evening, but the suggestion is they've been waiting many evenings as well, and they wait by a tree. Estragon and Vladimir have a very mundane existence. They talk about their boots and their hats and the vegetables that they eat, the carrots and turnips, etc. They have a very frugal existence. And some people suggest that this kind of waiting by the side of the road has been influenced by Beckett's waiting when he was in the French Resistance, waiting for supplies, and that this landscape here was characteristic of a very bleak landscape in a war-torn France. And that the waiting is to do with waiting for something to come and to arrive, for Beckett probably an airdrop in the war. But the very notion of being by the side of the road, expecting either to go on a journey or for something to come. These two characters talk about the Bible to pass the time, they discuss hanging themselves, they discuss some aspects of their past existence. We get to know very little really about them, but we witness their dialogue and we witness the banter and the antics that they get up to, and sometimes the misery and the difficulties that they encounter while waiting. Towards the end of Act 1, we have Pozzo and Lucky come along. Pozzo is a kind of land-owning type. He certainly sees himself as above these two tramps, and he brings, tied up, a slave character with him called Lucky, who is ironically named because he is rather the least fortunate in the play. Lucky is prompted to entertain, and we have Lucky's speech that some of you will have come across in your reading, I hope, which is a sort of cacophony of muddled language, but with a focus on the world deteriorating and quite a big focus on death there. So that's delivered, but then Pozzo and Lucky, off they trot, and then comes the mysterious boy, and Vladimir and Estragon engage him in conversation. It transpires that the boy has come from Godot, so the audience begin to have some hope that this Godot does exist. So the audience in the play expect some progression in the second act. However, the audience are disappointed with this. And actually Act 2 pans out pretty much the same, certainly in structure, as Act 1. We start with the banter between the characters, we move on to Pozzo and Lucky's arrival, though Pozzo and Lucky have deteriorated somewhat. Pozzo's gone blind, they can barely walk. Estragon and Vladimir too end up falling over and kind of descending into this almost hellish muddle in the middle of the stage. On the one hand, this is this kind of tragedy, them nearing death and perhaps the end of life and the end of physical existence, but also there's a lot of slapstick and comedy in here. Again, the boy comes, there is no progression there. Godot is not going to come at the moment, and we end the second act very much in the same place as in the first act. This time Vladimir says let's go and Estragon says yes let's, but there is no movement. So there is a distinct lack of progression in this play. So there you have the brief outline of the plot, such as there is. Really, this is a play about the business of waiting and what, how humans adapt to waiting and circumstances that they are thrust in. There is also in this second act much more mention of death, and there is talk of women giving birth astride the grave. So there is a focus there on that, this idea of being born into certain death, and that life is a very quick transitory purpose. But actually, if you're sitting watching the play, and as some of the early audiences did, they didn't find it to be a quick transitory play, and they found it quite tedious, repetitive. Repetition is a very big part of what Beckett is doing in order for us to experience the mundane existence of these two tramps. So much has been made of who or what Godot is. Beckett clearly declared that if he had wanted it to be God, he would have said so. But naturally, there are connections with a religious salvation in the minds of the audience, certainly in a mid-20th century context. But really, that's for you to make up your own mind about what you think Godot is and or represents. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll do some more of these videos concentrating on Godot and the characters and some of the imagery in the play. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed that and that you'll be able to tackle Waiting for Godot just like Maria.